What's up, everybody? It's a big day for Chicago Bears football. This is WCG Radio of Windy City Gridiron, your number one source for Bears news over at SB Nation. With you, as always, Robert Zaglinski, editor and writer for WCG. And like I just said, we have a historic day. The 16th head coach in franchise history is set to be introduced in about an hour and a half from when this podcast is being recorded. Sorry, apologies. Matt Nagy, the former Chiefs offensive coordinator, is set to be introduced by Ryan Pace, George McCaskey, Ted Phillips, and company at Hallis Hall. His opening statements, he's the handpicked guy. He's going to be the guy that gets to develop Mitch Trubisky, that ideally takes the Bears back into contention after a 7-year playoff drought. There's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to unpack. It's not really going to end after today, but luckily enough, I've brought in Pete Sweeney. So he's a former Chiefs reporter, and he's a current Arrowhead Pride writer, our sister Chiefs website over at SB Nation, writer, host, and producer. He's a man of all trades. Pete, thanks for coming on. Thanks for talking Nagy with me.
Oh, yeah, no problem. I mean, this is a guy who I kind of got to know a little bit as a member of the Kansas City Chiefs organization. And now that I've been writing for SB Nation, kind of just been watching him from afar a little bit.
So let's jump right into it. You just mentioned it. You've kind of like developed a little bit of a relationship. You kind of like got to know him a little bit. What are your impressions of Nagy as a coach, as like a leader of a locker room? What's he bringing to the Bears?
You know, I think it's one of these Andy Reid guys that you've started to see across the league, like a Todd Bowles, Ron Rivera, and you know, it's somebody that Andy Reid took under his wing and really developed through time in Philadelphia and Kansas City. It's someone who started as an intern in 2008 with Andy Reid in Philadelphia, and really, as you have kind of see him grow into, the coach he is and the man he is at the age of 39 years old. Today, he's just a guy that brings a lot of energy, who's really enthusiastic about football. And when I would watch him with the quarterbacks, especially at training camp, you could see that the quarterbacks really respect him, not only as a coach, but maybe as a colleague and a friend. At the age of 39, he just has that younger feel to him, and I think he'll bring a lot of energy to the Chicago Bears.
How much credence should we put into the fact, because there was a comment that everybody in Chicago media was circulating around where Reid considered Nagy the best assistant he's ever had, or the best head coaching prospect. Maybe that's a better way to put it. When you consider guys like we kind of just noted, John Harbaugh, Ron Rivera, Doug Peterson, Sean McDermott, is that Reid selling Nagy, kind of like helping him land this gig with the Bears, as he was kind of noted he was going to be a big time head coaching prospect, or was that genuine? Do you believe that Nagy really kind of was that guy, was one of the best head coaching prospects Reid has ever had?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think Reid's looking out for his guy, and yeah, you can talk about coaching prospects all you want, but you had guys under Reid that have left and won Super Bowls. That's something Andy Reid hasn't still been able to do as a head coach. Yeah. So granted, I think those are positive words, but am I going to hang my hat on that necessarily? I mean, I wouldn't fall too in love with that. I think, he's trying to help his guy, and I think he really does believe in Matt Nagy. He wouldn't be signing off on him, putting his name on him like that if he didn't believe in Matt Nagy. But as a guy Andy Reid thinks positively about, and someone he thinks will have success in Chicago.
There was another report. I don't really look at the Chiefs' collapse in the second half against the Titans as his big concern or an indictment of Nagy if he was the play caller, if he wasn't, if that was his doing. There were a lot of other factors. There's more nuance to it. But it was a story, and there was, I guess an innocuous tweet that said Andy Reid took over the play calling in the second half to kind of help Nagy with the interview. What's the story there?
It seems like all Andy Reid is saying about it is that he was calling the good plays. Or I'm sorry, was that Andy Reid was calling the bad plays and Nagy was calling all the good plays? Kind of.
Yeah, that's convenient.
kind of getting people off his back as far as what was happening. I don't think he wants to sell either of them out, whether it be himself or Nagy.
Yeah.
If you look at the broadcast is showing what appears to be Andy Reid calling plays in the second half. It right now is a question, and one Andy Reid is not giving any clarity on. But what I will tell you is that the bigger sample, Nagy taking over in the middle of the season, kind of got the Chiefs offense back where it needed to be. And that's only a positive sign, I think, for Chicago.
Yeah. Talk about what he changed up. What was different about the offense he ran, that he called in retrospect, in comparison rather, to Reid's offense? Because I mean, when the Chiefs started 5-0 and they everyone was noting their college style offense, what did Nagy change to get them back on track?
Our guy Ken Swanson, he's great at Arrowhead Pride. He did a lot of research into this and called it the Matt Nagy effect. And what that entailed was a lot more run pass option. But with that being said, it was a big tendency switch, because I think Andy Reid fell into a situation where he thought he was showing a tendency. And anytime you switch to anybody, it's going to be different. There's no tape on it. There's no tape on style. There's no trend that you could follow. So I think part of what helped Nagy was that no one had ever seen him call plays before. So there were no trends to go after and look at and say, okay, he's going to be calling this play in this scenario, this play in this scenario, and so on and so forth. What I would caution is, yes, I mean, he did involve a little bit more run pass option here in Kansas City, meaning he likes that style of offensive football, but he's going to build an offense and an offensive playbook based upon the strengths of the Bears. So what does Mitch Trubisky do well? What does he see in Trubisky that he does well? And then he'll go and tackle the playbook from there. I don't think it's going to be a situation where just because it was working in Kansas City, it'll necessarily work for a guy like Trubisky. Yeah.
How did he kind of unlock the Kansas City offense, make it one of the bigger play offenses? How did he? I mean, I see Alex Smith, and I think most of the league sees Alex Smith as a competent starter, but no one would ever confuse him for Aaron Rodgers. And this year, he was one of the more efficient deep passers in the league. Kansas City had one of the bigger play offenses in the league. We don't know what Mitch Trubisky necessarily is yet. We don't know if he's more talented or if he's better than Smith. He hasn't done enough. He has 12 career starts in the NFL. But what will you kind of look for that Nagy will be able to implement that for Trubisky? Because we just kind of touched on it.
You know, one of the things that Andy Reid was doing at the beginning of the year was his college style offense, a lot of misdirections, a lot of option plays, things like that. And what Nagy came in and did is it seemed like he simplified a little bit more, simplified the run game for the offensive line, to take an advantage of a guy like a Jordan Howard or Tariq Cohen. I think what Nagy found a way to do was take the Chiefs' strengths, the best that they had to offer, which is Travis Kelce, Kareem Hunt, and Tyreek Hill, and really split up the usage of these guys to allow them to be open, and all at the same time taking that defense on a given week and saying, what is their weakness? Maybe their safeties aren't great, linebackers, aren't as fast. If that's a Travis Kelce week, maybe the cornerbacks are a weakness. You send Tyreek Hill down, but down the field on a fly route, but that only gets real activated if you're getting the run game going early, and they got to put an extra guy in the box. So it just seems like he had a little bit more to the strategy of offensive football, and he brought that to the table in the middle of the year, and it led to a Chiefs stretch where they were undefeated at the end of the year too. Just a really interesting year for the Chiefs in that they had one win in the middle of the season and then 5 at the beginning, 4 at the end. But Nagy had a lot to do with those 4 at the end.
One of the bigger concerns, so this comes up for really any new head coach, especially a younger guy like Nagy at 39, is putting together a staff. If the Bears are, say, able to retain Fangio, or if not Vic Fangio, or if not, how much input will Andy Reid have in kind of helping one of his understudies? Because it's my understanding that he helped Doug Peterson and he's helped previous guys that have served under him before.
Yeah, I think building a staff will be interesting. It's sort of an unwritten rule in the NFL. You kind of ask the previous head coach that you're with if it's okay to take certain guys. A lot of times, Andy Reid, people were calling for the defensive coordinator's head the other day, so he's about to maybe have no coordinators. So I don't know how excited he will be about getting rid of even more of his staff that he now needs to sort of replenish these roles for. But yeah, I mean, I think Andy Reid will help with that. I think over the years in the National Football League, you get to be around the block and you talk to a lot of people. And I think, that'll help with Nagy's decision making as to who to bring in. But he's a really likable guy. Honestly, I think the offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator of a team, you don't really get to know unless you're in that city, really specifically covering that team, really rooting for that team. I kind of consider Nagy, and though he is 8 years older than a guy like Sean McVay, I relate them as far as the energy and the style that they're going to bring as, at press conferences, in the locker room videos, things like that. I think Nagy's really going to bring a lot of life to the Chicago Bears, and it's going to be, maybe it hasn't been for a while, but it's going to be fun again. And I think that's going to be important because this is a really developing franchise with a lot of young players, and I think they're going to feed off Matt Nagy.
Yeah, you kind of just touched on that. He's, in a way, he's almost the anti-John Fox, and kind of like been looking at him in press conferences, how he interacts with the press, with us. Excited about that. You said like that he kind of would extend that to the locker room, right? So how would he relate to the defensive players as kind of a younger guy? I mean, McVay had Wade Phillips, obviously. So is it going to be key for someone like Nagy to have Fangio?
I'll give you an example. Like at training camp, Nagy and Bob Sutton, they basically go after each other because up until the game start, you really only could play each other. And they get into it, like not with each other necessarily, but as far as like Matt Nagy and the offense having success, he loves to see his offense having success, even if against the Chiefs defense at training camp. And this is before the games even started. And then, after each practice at training camp, he partakes in a quarterback drill where they'll set up targets and they try to hit the garbage cans or the goalposts and things. And he'll actually participate, him being a former college quarterback, and not only participate, but to a point like, not angry, but get mad if, one guy, is maybe cheating, or he'll like brag to Alex Smith if he hit a target that he couldn't. And so I think that's the energy he'll bring. It's going to be like a real young energy. And I think it's going to be life that the Bears need because, for the past few years under Fox, and it wasn't really that successful the past few years, it looked, at least from afar, that it wasn't fun anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that instantly changes with Matt Nagy's arrival.
Yeah, it's an injection that they badly needed. They needed a fresh voice, a guy who's hungry, a guy he's getting his first opportunity at a head coaching gig. He was enamored reportedly with Mitch Trubisky in the draft process. Can you elaborate a little bit on what happened there? That was also a report that kind of started to come up when the Bears were interviewing Nagy this past weekend.
Well, the thing that's interesting to me about it is there was another report that came out that the Colts were all in on Matt Nagy, and Nagy was more into the idea of Mitch Trubisky than he was into the idea of Andrew Luck. And yeah, I mean, Andrew Luck has all those injury issues, and no one really is completely sure as to what to expect when it comes to the future of Luck. So that has to, you have to think about that when you discuss this. But just as far as Trubisky goes, he has traits that Matt Nagy obviously feels he could work with. I mean, I don't know if you can necessarily compare him to Patrick Mahomes, who the Chiefs ended up drafting, but
yeah, they're a little they're pretty different.
Idea of Trubisky, of him being this dual threat guy, these are the type of quarterbacks that Andy Reid likes to work with. I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but Donovan McNabb, Michael Vick, Alex Smith, I think to an extent doesn't get enough credit for it.
Kind of.
Trubisky kind of fits, a little bit into that category. He's not exactly Patrick Mahomes. He's not exactly Alex Smith. There's a little bit, more to Trubisky, but you'd understand why Nagy's excited to work with this kid because he's super young. He's got a long career ahead of him. The Bears think he's the guy. holds franchises back more than anything in the NFL. It's not knowing who the quarterback is. You see it with the New York Jets.
Absolutely.
Maybe eventually with the Buffalo Bills and the Washington Redskins this offseason. The search for a quarterback can hold your franchise back for multiple years. And the Bears already had that box checked. And for him to, kind of pick the young kid in Trubisky, the unknown, over Andrew Luck, which, again, there's a lot of injury questions, but Andrew Luck is great. I think it speaks volumes.
What should the Bears be concerned about with Nagy and Trubisky and company now? What kind of gives you pause moving forward? I mean, because we do have to discuss it, right? So,
for me, I think you're talking about Nagy. Nagy, what are some negatives, perhaps?
Mm-hmm.
I think if there's any negative, it's a lack of experience as a head coach, and that's really hard because he's a first-year head coach, and you wonder how he'll do with this brand new these brand new responsibilities. I foresee Nagy being the offensive play caller, so you wonder the dynamic. What's the dynamic going to be with whoever is the offensive coordinator? How does he fill his defensive staff? We have no idea what his philosophy is on defense and what he has in mind. He was a coach's assistant, offensive quality control, and quarterbacks and offensive coordinator, so never really even worked with the defense. So is it going to be a situation where they're basically the defensive head coach? You know what I mean? I just think there's a lot of upside, and there always is for first-year head coaches. But the downside is you don't know what you're getting in a lot of regard, because that person has just never had to deal with it before. And not to say that it's definitely going to be bad, but may not necessarily be good, or there may be some growing pains in that too. And I think that, if anything, for me, I'm a big Nagy guy. So for me, I think the negative would be you just don't know for some duties that a head coach now has to do.
Yeah, and that really would have transferred with probably most of the other reported candidates the Bears were looking at. I mean, John DeFilippo's inexperienced. Pat Shurmur had a previously failed tenure. Josh McDaniels, no one knows how he's grown since his first Denver stint years back. So, I mean, prospect has concerns of inexperience or maturity, whatever else. You kind of just have to let it play out now. I mean, what's going to happen on the field, what he's going to do in the offseason, and we'll be judged by whether the Bears are winning games and by whether Mitch Trubisky becomes a franchise quarterback. That's really
I think that's the magic answer. I mean, if he can win, then people forget about maybe what all your weaknesses or insecurities might be. And that's going to be the number one key is, okay, I mean, Mitch Trubisky has certainly flashed. Now win games with them and become competitive. I don't necessarily think he necessarily needs to make the playoffs next year, but I think a reasonable goal for the Chicago Bears would be 8-8. Let's get back to 500. Let's get back to neutral, and then let's take the next step as this quarterback develops.
Are there any kind of, like, we were just wrapping this up a little bit, are there any anecdotes, the unique anecdotes you have of Nagy in Kansas City? Because you just said you're a big Nagy guy. So, stories of him in the locker room, stories of him interacting with players that would kind of shed a better light on this energetic guy we're painting him as, that we see him as, that he actually is.
I think the best one would be the one I described about training camp. I think the best look that you get at some of these interactions between coaching staff and players are at training camp, because the entire practice, you're allowed to watch it. Once the season starts, you're only allowed to watch about 20 minutes of practice before they kick the media out. And that's where you really see him teaching and interacting. And, a lot of times Andy Reid will talk about the quarterback's room and how involved Nagy is with that, and how the players love it because there's open communication, not only between Nagy and Alex Smith, but it's free reign for a guy like Pat Mahomes or Tyler Bray as the third string to talk, and they have open discussion, and it's not only a learning area, it's an area where they expect to win. And one thing about Nagy too, and not that you ever want to see Mike Glennon or Mark Sanchez in the game, but he'll have every quarterback ready, and I think he stresses that, and I think he's a He's like Andy Reid in the sense that he's a teacher of quarterbacks, and this is a guy that the players respect also because he's done it before. He is a quarterback. So, and in some ways, Andy Reid was never a quarterback, and so maybe there's an advantage to actually having played the position, which Nagy brings to the table. But like I said, I just think it's a younger, 39-year-old, energetic guy, and specific anecdote. It's hard to pin down besides that training camp one, but just as far as the culture he's going to bring, I think it's going to be a nice culture shock, but a cultural shock in a good way for the Bears.
Yeah, that they needed. I actually spoke too soon. I wanted to touch on how would you compare this? It might be a reach because these guys are really all unproven aside from Jordan Howard. But if I compared Adam Shaheen to Travis Kelce, like Nagy getting him involved in that way. Now, maybe not a superstar tight end, but a competent starter, above average starter. Tariq Cohen to kind of the Bears, Tyreek Hill, probably used less though, and then Jordan Howard, that Kareem Hunt guy. How applicable is that for Nagy to kind of like how he uses them?
I think the closest comparison you may have in this one is Jordan Howard to Kareem Hunt. I just think Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce are just special players. Like I put Kelce on the Gronkowski level, just as far as effective. It's hard. I think there'll definitely be some tight end, some tight end usage and a tight end aspect. I mean, Andy Reid loves 3 tight end sets. We joke about in Kansas City, maybe he's fallen in love with the tight end screen a little too much, and I think he'll be using the tight ends. But I mean, Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, that's almost an embarrassment of riches. It almost makes me kind of sick in a way, because do you think back, like, how did they end up losing to the Tennessee Titans at home with these players? I know Kelce got hurt, but still. But one thing I do know about Nagy is, though those players I don't think are on the Hill Kelce level, he'll see what the strengths are, and that's one thing he's going to have to work with pace in the draft is, let's see what our weaknesses are, and let's get some players that I can work with. And here's who I like. Here's why I think this player is better than this other one. And here's what I think I can do with them. And then, I think just keep in mind that this is a rebuilding thing. They're trying to build a winner here. It may not be next year, but I think this is the right guy for the foreseeable future to accomplish that in the next years.
Pete, I really appreciate you coming on short notice, getting that all this quick breakdown, and we covered a lot, and I think almost 30 minutes. I really appreciate you coming on. We can find you primarily at Arrowhead Pride, correct?
Yeah, my articles and stuff are on arrowheadpride.com. I do talk about a lot of different things on my personal Twitter, including the Chiefs and the NFL and occasionally pro wrestling. I am a contributor for Cage Side Seats of SB Nation, so you can get me at PG Sween, PGSWEEN.
Follow Pete. He has valuable insight. Definitely check him out. Check his workout with Arrowhead Pride, with pro wrestling, if you're into it. Pete, again, thank you so much. This has been WCG Radio of Windy City Gridiron, Bears website for SB Nation. Robert Ziglinski, as always. Follow WCG at WC Gridiron on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter at Robert Ziglinski, and as Pete just noted, at PG Swing. That's PGSWEEN, just to clarify. Thanks, everybody. The Nagy era in Chicago has begun. We'll have much more as the weeks and months roll on. Stay classy.